Across Australia, on almost every major road, there's a fuel station lit up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Cars in and out constantly, a convenience store humming in the background, and a fuel price sign that somehow changes every single day. It looks like one of the most stable businesses in the country. Constant demand, prime real estate, a captive audience of over 20 million registered vehicles. But underneath that constant stream of customers is a business with brutally thin fuel margins, some of the strictest environmental regulation in Australian retail, and a price tag that can run into the millions before you've sold a single litre. So how does a fuel station actually make money in Australia? Let's break down the economics. Buying an existing petrol station in Australia typically costs anywhere from $200,000 for a small independent site, up to $2 million or more for a well-located, high-turnover station. If you're going the franchise route with a major brand, expect the total investment, franchise fee, build-out, and startup costs combined to land close to that $2 million mark. Under a franchise arrangement, the fuel supplier usually owns the tanks, pumps, and fuel lines, which reduces some of your upfront equipment cost but locks you into their supply contract and pricing terms. If you're building a station from scratch rather than buying one, the equipment costs stack up fast. Each fuel dispenser alone costs $10,000 to $20,000, and a typical station needs several. Underground storage tanks, canopy structures, and convenience store fit-outs add substantially more. And in Australia, if you're a foreign investor purchasing the property itself, you may also need approval from the Foreign Investment Review Board before the sale can even go through. Now here's the part that surprises most new operators. The fuel itself is barely profitable. Margins on fuel sales typically sit at just 1 to 2%. You are not making real money by selling petrol. You're making money from everything sold inside the store. The coffee, the snacks, the car wash, and increasingly EV charging. This is why every viable fuel station in Australia today is really two businesses running side by side, a low-margin fuel operation that brings people onto the site, and a higher-margin convenience retail operation that actually pays the bills. Well-located stations with strong, diversified income streams, fuel, retail, car wash, EV charging, can generate annual returns in the 10 to 15% range. But that number depends entirely on getting the retail side right. A station that only sells fuel is a station that's barely surviving. Licensing a fuel station in Australia means clearing several separate approval processes before you open. You'll need an ABN and GST registration like any business. You'll need fuel retail permits, fire safety approval, and building permits from your local council. And critically, you'll need environmental approval for your underground storage tanks, because since January 2020, every petrol station in Australia has been legally required to hold a license specifically for storing petroleum. This environmental requirement is the single biggest regulatory difference between a fuel station and almost any other retail business on this channel. Underground fuel tanks are one of the most common sources of soil and groundwater contamination in the country. If a tank leaks even slowly, it can contaminate land well beyond the site boundary, and the person responsible for the tank is legally required to detect and report any leak, often within 30 days of it being discovered. The rules for who actually regulates these tanks vary state by state. In New South Wales, most underground storage systems are now monitored by local councils rather than the state EPA, following a regulation change in 2019. In Victoria, Tasmania, and other states, similar underground petroleum storage system regulations apply, each requiring regular monitoring, qualified technicians for any installation or repair work, and a documented plan for how leaks would be detected and fixed. Get this wrong, and the penalties aren't just financial. A serious contamination event can shut a site down entirely and trigger a costly, years-long remediation process. So what does the ownership picture actually look like? On one side, you have extremely stable, round-the-clock demand. A fuel station is genuinely one of the few Australian retail businesses that generates revenue at every hour of the day. On the other side, you have wafer-thin fuel margins, a convenience store that has to work hard to make up the difference, and one of the most heavily regulated pieces of infrastructure in Australian small business, sitting quite literally under your feet. The operators who succeed in this business aren't the ones competing hardest on fuel price. They're the ones who treat the fuel pump as the thing that gets a customer onto the property, and the convenience store as the thing that actually makes them money, all while staying on the right side of some of the strictest environmental compliance rules in the country.